Washington, Federal Court. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, lawyers, and politicians all came to watch what promised to be one of the most high-profile lawsuits of the year. On one side is Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida and one of the key figures in Donald Trump's legal team. On the other is Jasmine Crockett, a congressional representative from Texas, known for her scathing criticism of the Republican Party and peremptory statements about the future of the United States. Pam sat confidently, with a straight back, in a dark blue suit, with an expression of determination on her face. She didn't come for revenge. She came to defend the idea, the country, principles. The judge declared the meeting open. "Your Honor," Pam said, standing up, "I represent the prosecution in this process. Today we will analyze not just words, but intentions. Not just statements, but destructive actions that undermine the foundations of American democracy." Jasmine smirked, crossing her arms. Her lawyer barely twitched. He knew who she was going to face. "Ms. Crockett is not just a politician," Bondi continued, turning to the jury. "She is the voice of a faction that seeks to destroy all dissent, intimidate opponents, and turn Congress into a platform of aggression and ideological hatred. And today we will show it. Based on her actions, words, and public statements." She nodded to the assistant. A video clip with excerpts of Jasmine's speeches appeared on the screen behind her, where she, shouting from the podium, accused Republicans of racism, sexism, and criminal indifference to the lives of ordinary Americans. "And that's just the beginning," Pam said. "We'll start with the facts. Since Mrs. Crockett, as a civil servant, violated her oath, neglected her duties and called for the division of the nation." Pam strode to the center of the room, her heels tapping a precise rhythm on the marble floor. She spoke with cold confidence, choosing each word carefully. "Let me start with the episode that took place on January 12 last year," she said, holding up a copy of the Congressional Internal Report. Then Ms. Crockett, in the midst of a meeting of the Human Rights Committee, defiantly left the hearing, calling the discussion a senseless farce promoted by white men with a savior complex. These words are recorded, they were broadcast live. The issue discussed at the time concerned the fate of 28,000 migrant children. This behavior is unacceptable not only from the point of view of ethics, but also a direct violation of official discipline. Some people in the audience began to move convulsively. Jasmine kept her outward composure, but she tensed up. She remembered that day. Her emotions were on edge, but she considered herself right. Then, it all sounded different now. Further, Bondi continued, without slowing down. In June, in an interview with one of the TV channels, Ms. Crockett said, and I quote, "If we had a real democracy, the Republican Party would have been banned long ago for crimes against humanity." End of quote. This is the rhetoric of radical authoritarianism. This is a direct incitement to political repression. You don't have to agree with the Republican Party. But calling for her ban violates the foundations of the Constitution, which, by the way, she swore to protect. Pam approached the defense table, looking directly into Jasmine's eyes. "Don't you think you've gone too far, Congresswoman? That the words you said in the heat of rage have turned into an instrument of political pressure and undermining the legitimacy of your opponents?" The judge knocked with his gavel. "Ms. Bondi, don't cross-examine me off the record. Stick to the procedure." "Of course, Your Honor," Pam nodded and turned back to the jury. "We will continue. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. This is a strategy. We will provide evidence that Ms. Crockett systematically used her position for aggressive ideological warfare, threatening the stability of law and order and deepening social division." She paused. "Today we will not talk about parties. It's not about skin color. It's about values. If we allow public leaders to humiliate their fellow citizens with impunity, call for political purges, and turn the rostrum of power into an arena of revenge, they will do it against you tomorrow." Jasmine's defender rose from the table. "Your Honor," he interjected, "we do not deny the emotionality of my client's words. But Ms. Bondi's speech sounds like a political sermon, not a legal accusation. If the prosecution has specific articles of violations, let them present them. If this is just an attempt to discredit an opinion, we demand the immediate termination of the process." The judge looked at the defender skeptically, but nodded anyway. "Ms. Bondi, the court really needs legal grounds, not just ideological ones." Pam nodded with a slight smile. She had expected this. "Thank you, Your Honor. It is to the legal grounds that I turn. She took a folder out of her briefcase and opened it. According to paragraph 502 of the Code of Conduct for Members of Congress, using official position to put pressure on public institutions outside the legislative process is a violation of federal regulations. On September 23, Ms. Crockett sent a letter to the Department of Justice demanding that an investigation be launched against one of the Republican governors, without a committee decision, without a vote, without even basic notification to her colleagues. She placed a copy of the letter on the table in front of the judge and the jury. This is not a private opinion. This is an action with an attempt to initiate criminal proceedings based on personal political hostility. Pause. And here is the proof of an even more egregious case. On October 7, she sent a request to TikTok and X, formerly Twitter, demanding that the accounts of several Republican activists be blocked, calling them, I quote, an information threat. Without a court order, without a process, a personal opinion, again turned into an act of pressure on private companies. The use of power against freedom of speech. Everything is documented. Pam looked around the room, not hiding her disdain. You are not just judging a woman who wittily argues on the airwaves. You are trying a federal official who methodically misused power. The system must provide an answer, or we'll set a dangerous precedent. Jasmine couldn't stand it. She stood up. I'll tell you what kind of precedent it is. Stop it, she shouted. This is the fear of a woman who has a voice. This is revenge for the fact that I'm not afraid to tell the truth to the Republicans. The judge struck the gavel sharply. Mrs. Crockett, you haven't testified yet. Sit down immediately. Jasmine looked at the judge with a challenge, but obeyed. The courtroom froze. Several reporters were already scribbling on their laptops. And Pam just tilted her head a little, like a predator who sees that its prey is starting to panic. The judge gave Pam permission to continue. She didn't waste a second. We're not talking about the right to an opinion here, she continued, addressing the jury. We're talking about systematic abuse of official position. Let me remind you, Ms. Crockett is not a blogger, not an activist from the street. She is a federal legislator sworn to defend the Constitution and laws of this country. And it is for this reason that there should be a higher demand for it. She took a step forward, her voice rising. We will provide correspondence in which Ms. Crockett coordinates pressure on the University of Texas administration, demanding the dismissal of a professor who allowed himself to quote Trump in a lecture on political communications. And not because he violated ethics, but because, I quote, this approach legitimizes the fascist rhetoric of the Republicans. Do you want to know what it is? This is not a defense of democracy. This is a party purge. A heavy silence fell in the hall. The judge leaned forward slightly, as if listening intently. Pam abruptly changed her tone. It became colder, tougher. Ms. Crockett has repeatedly made statements that are directly opposed to the spirit of service to society. Her tweet on November 11, there should be no dialogue with Republicans. Only resistance, only radical actions, and no forgiveness. This is the language of civil conflict. This is hate speech. And if we ignore such calls, we will only accelerate the catastrophe to which it is pushing us. She turned to Jasmine. You called us racists, fascists, criminals. But when you were given power, you used it not to help people, but for revenge. You tried to rewrite the rules for yourself. But there is only one law in this room. And he's not on your side. Jasmine's protector jumped up. Your Honor, we protest. Ms. Bondi cannot turn the final words of an interrogation into a political execution. The judge raised his hand. The prosecution is finishing its opening statement. The protest is rejected. Go ahead, Ms. Bondi. Pam placed a folder labeled, Witness Number 1, in front of the jury. We're calling the first witness. Laura Maynard, a former employee of Mrs. Crockett's office, who personally participated in the preparation of a number of internal memoranda that later became the basis of her policy initiatives. In her affidavit, Miss Maynard states that, the door to the hall opened, and a young woman entered, tense but determined. Jasmine lowered her gaze. She knew what Laura would say. And she knew that she had rejected her, just when she began to doubt. Pam smiled. She knew that now she had not just facts, but a voice from within. Laura Maynard sat in the witness chair. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice sounded confident. I've been working on Congresswoman Crockett's team for almost 2 years. At first, I believed in her ideas. She was talking about justice, about equality. But I soon realized that her real goal was not reform, but domination. Her approach was not to unite, but to suppress. Pam nodded. Miss Maynard, can you explain what exactly you observed? Yes. She regularly refused to consider Republican initiatives, even if they dealt with neutral or national topics, such as school safety or protecting children from online exploitation. She said, I won't sign anything with their name on it. Let them go in peace. A whisper swept through the hall. One of the jurors frowned. Besides, Laura continued, she forced us to collect dossiers on Republican colleagues. Who is connected with whom, who said what when, on what air. Anything that can be used against them. It was not an opposition. It was harassment. Pam took a step closer. You were talking about an internal memorandum. Can you tell us more about it? Of course. In April, we prepared an internal document with recommendations on how to work with representatives of the southern states. I suggested a softer approach through economic and environmental initiatives. Jasmine crossed out everything and wrote in her handwriting, hitting the pain points. They need to be cornered so that they beg for negotiations themselves. Do you have a copy of this document? Yes. I handed it over to your investigator. Pam nodded gratefully and handed a copy to the judge. Your Honor, this is direct evidence of an aggressive approach to inter-party cooperation. We are dealing not with a politician, but with a tactician of war who considers compromise a weakness. Jasmine remained silent, but her face tightened. She understood that now everything was not just statements, now it had become a case, backed up by evidence, papers, and, worst of all, by people from her entourage. The judge turned to Laura. Are you saying that the Congresswoman deliberately provoked a political conflict? Laura nodded. She wasn't just provoking, she lived it. Pam returned to the table, glancing at Jasmine for a second. There was no gloating, just confidence. She knew. The court is not a place for a show. This is a place for the truth, and the truth has finally begun to sound. The judge dismissed Laura with a gesture. She left the witness stand without looking back. Jasmine was silent. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. His face was set in stone. Pam stood up again, without losing her rhythm. Your Honor, the next witness for the prosecution will be Jared Thompson, an employee of one of the non-governmental organizations that came under pressure from Ms. Crockett's office. His organization was engaged in educational campaigns on suffrage, including in Republican districts. Jared went to the podium. He was dressed modestly and spoke calmly but confidently. In July, we received an email signed by Congresswoman Crockett's assistant. The letter stated that if we did not review our unbiased coverage of voter registration procedures, the funding of our program would be called into question. We were working on a federal grant, and it wasn't just a warning, it was pressure. Pam looked up. Do you have a copy of this letter? Yes, it's attached to the case. But the main thing is that a week later we lost our funding. Without explanation. A month later, we learned that our grant had been reallocated to an initiative directly related to the Crockett apparatus. The courtroom roared. The judge knocked with his gavel. Please be quiet. Pam didn't pause. Your Honor, this is not just an abuse. This is a deliberate subordination of state resources to a personal political agenda. And if someone says that everyone is doing this, I will say, we are here to end this. Jasmine's protector jumped up. Protest. We demand that this episode be considered separately, as part of the administrative process. The judge looked at the documents. The protest is rejected. The witness claims that the Congresswoman's actions were directly related to the abuse of federal powers. Go ahead. Pam addressed the jury, looking everyone in the eye. When power becomes a weapon, democracy becomes a victim. Today, here in this hall, we are not deciding the fate of one woman. We are deciding whether we can stop the government from turning into a machine of repression. We are deciding whether politics in the United States will remain a dialogue or turn into a war of all against all. She stopped talking, and in the silence, someone in the audience could be heard exhaling softly. Jasmine stood up. Your Honor, she said, I'm ready to testify. The judge looked at her with raised eyebrows. Are you sure? Your lawyer. I'm talking on my own. I don't hide behind people. If they want my truth, they'll get it. The judge nodded. Good. Ms. Crockett, you can give your statement. I remind you that you are doing this voluntarily and under oath. Jasmine went to the podium. Her posture was straight, her voice firm. She was no longer hiding behind silence. I've heard a lot. Accusations, reproaches, half-truths. Now it's my turn. I don't go back on my words. I did call the Republicans a threat. And do you know why? Because they are a threat to women, to minorities, to the poor, to students, to the planet. Pam watched in silence as Jasmine turned the podium into a stage. She had expected this, a public defense on the verge of hysteria. But there was something more, a challenge. Jasmine continued. Yes, I refused to sign the bills proposed by the Republicans. Because each of them was poisoned by reservations, anti-abortion measures, the abolition of transgender rights, hidden cuts in social programs. These are not compromises, they are traps. And I'm not going to be a comfortable black woman who nods when pressed. There was applause in the audience. Several people supported her. The judge stopped it right away. Stop it. This is a trial, not a rally. Jasmine took a deep breath, then added, and if you think you can condemn me for trying to limit the influence of propaganda, then let's be honest. We are in an information war. Do you call this freedom of speech, when millions of dollars are poured into hate-mongering accounts? I called it a threat because that's what a threat is. Pam finally spoke. Do you admit that you used your official position to put pressure on private organizations? Jasmine looked at her without fear. I used my position to fight what I considered dangerous. And yes, if I had to, I would do it again. Even violating federal regulations? If the law protects hatred, it needs to be changed. I didn't come here to obey the system. I came here to change it. The judge intervened. Ms. Crockett, do you realize that you have just confessed to deliberate abuse of authority? I understand that I acted according to my conscience. And if your system considers it a crime, then blame your conscience. The words sounded impressive, even poetic. But there was anxiety in the audience. The jurors exchanged glances. For some it was a passion, for others it was a danger. Pam came closer. She spoke calmly, almost in a whisper. When conscience begins to justify the violation of the law, we get not reform, but anarchy. You have been given power, Ms. Crockett, and you turned it into a weapon. And now you have to answer for it. Jasmine, for the first time in the entire process, looked away. She felt that the stage had not saved her. Those who came for the show got it. But those who passed sentence were not looking for passion, but for the truth. The judge announced a break, but the audience did not calm down. Conversations, whispers, glances filled with anxiety and tension. When the meeting resumed, all attention was once again focused on the figure of Pam Bondi. She stood up calmly, confidently, as if she already knew how it would end. Your Honor, she began, we didn't just hear the witnesses and look at the documents. We have seen how power can be perverted. And let Ms. Crockett talk about morality, about fighting injustice, but she does it by stepping over the law, through institutions, through the very essence of democracy. She walked down the table, addressing the jury. We don't judge people here for their views. We judge by actions, and these actions were deliberate, planned, and repetitive. Pressure on free organizations, the destruction of discourse, provoking conflict. This is not heroism. This is authoritarianism under the guise of progressivism. One of the jurors nodded, the other crossed his arms, but his eyes were focused. Pam knew they could hear her, and the most disturbing thing is that Mrs. Crockett does not repent. She says, I would do it again, so she doesn't need a trial. She needs a tribunal where there is no law, only ideology. But in this country, they are still judged not by party affiliation, but by facts. And we have the facts. The judge addressed the jury. After listening to both sides, you must make a decision on the following points. Abuse of office, deliberate violation of the norms of the Federal Code of Ethics, political pressure on independent organizations, and actions aimed at inciting hostility. Go to the meeting. The wait lasted almost 2 hours. At this time, Jasmine sat motionless, staring at one point. Her lawyer was saying something quietly, but she wasn't listening. Pam leafed through the materials, calmly, methodically, like a soldier who knows that the battle has been won. When the jury returned, the judge asked, the jury, have you reached a unanimous decision? Yes, Your Honor. What is your verdict? The senior juror stood up, guilty on all counts. There was a deathly silence in the hall for a moment, and then there was a loud exhalation, as if the truth itself had released the air. The judge put down his gavel. Congresswoman Crockett will be removed from office. The decision on her future political suitability will be referred to the relevant committee. A criminal investigation is also being opened into the facts of pressure on government agencies. Jasmine didn't cry. She just stood up, slowly, silently, as if all this had already happened somewhere in her head long before the verdict. Pam went to the table, gathered up the documents, and only glanced briefly in the direction of her former opponent. Without malice, without celebration, just like a prosecutor who has done his job. Outside the courtroom, under the flash of cameras, the journalists waited. But Pam didn't stop. She walked by with her head held high. The truth, she thought, is not big words. This is endurance. And today, the truth stood out.